went back to its previous level, but the pattern of mortality changed. It was permanently altered. In other words, it became very much more volatile. It spiked up and down. If you look at the graphs before and after digital cell phone towers, it's different. It's smoother and much more unchangeable before 1986 and much more volatile after. So that indicates a level of stress, and fairly intense stress, that we have all been living with for the last approximately 20 years, that we were not living with before.
I note that in your book you also make associations with the increase in ADHD and childhood behavior patterns. Blindness or hearing problems do tend to show up.
Well, there have been studies linking cell phone use to hearing loss, and not only cell phone use, but computer use to loss of vision.
Give us a little bit of insight into that.
Well, you sit in front of computers, you're in a quite powerful electric field, you're in a quite powerful magnetic field, you have a static electric charge that builds up on your body, and there are frequencies. This is even with a wired computer with no wireless capability. There are still frequencies coming off the video display terminal and the computer itself throughout the spectrum, clear up into the microwave range, although not nearly as powerful as when you turn on your Wi-Fi. And your face, most people sit with their screen directly in front of their face, so your eyes get heavily exposed.
What is it that makes people, in your estimation, so unaware of the negative impact that this technology is having?
Well, it's a cultural phenomenon, and it's quite deeply rooted because it goes back to the year 1800, when an Italian physicist by the name of Volta, which we name the volt after, the electrical unit, the volt after, Alessandro Volta invented the electric battery in the year 1800. And he had enormous influence. And he pronounced, since he was able to generate electricity simply by touching two dissimilar metals together, he said that electricity was purely an inanimate substance that had nothing to do with life. Prior to Volta, in the 18th century, people thought of electricity as a property of living things, living organisms. Volta said, no, electricity has nothing to do with life, and he was very widely believed. And because of his tremendous influence, the world has been wired for electricity without a thought to its effects on health and its effects on the environment. And even though decades later scientists began to discover that in fact electricity does have something to do with life, and that the 18th century thought was more correct than was believed, the infrastructure had started to be installed, and it had become deeply ingrained in our unconscious that electricity is not harmful. And we've been living with that mistake for over 2 centuries, and it's extremely difficult to change. People don't want it to change because of the convenience of everything that has been built upon that initial infrastructure. So you tell people electricity makes us ill. It's such a new and shocking thought in most people's minds. After all, we're all carrying around cell phones and working on wireless computers, and we don't give it a second thought. So it's because it goes almost into our conception anymore of ourselves as human beings that electricity cannot be harmful. Technology cannot be that harmful, except that it is.
And not only is it that harmful, again, I want to bring in the concept that it's not simply human beings who are being impacted. It is every living creature on the planet. It's trees. It is everything that we live with that is being impacted in a negative manner. In your book, you write about ADHD, and also the death rate increases when there's a cell tower that is placed in a certain vicinity.
Well, I also published detailed statistics going back to the beginning of the 19th century, showing the exact correlation of the cancer curve and the diabetes curve and the heart disease curve with various stages of electrification. And I didn't invent this. Dr. Samuel Millam, that's 6 or 7 years ago, published his book on dirty electricity, in which he published preliminary preliminary statistics on heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, and proved, at least preliminarily, that when you electrify a previously unelectrified rural area, the cancer rate quintuples. And he found that shocking. It is shocking. And again, people electrify without a thought. It's not considered an environmental factor, and it must be, because, in my opinion, we've come about as far as we can go with electrification and with wireless electrification as we can without reaching catastrophe, and we are threatened with that.
Is there any form of electricity that you find particularly dangerous?
Wireless technology. It is possible to have ordinary electricity confined to wires, provided that we become aware that this is a health factor, an environmental factor, and that we engineer it properly. It is not possible to do that with wireless technology, because with wireless, you're broadcasting it through the air deliberately. We're deliberately polluting the earth instead of accidentally.
How would one go about putting in wire technology in a manner that would avoid health problems?
Well, you can severely limit the health problems and make it as safe as possible. First of all, you clean up the electricity. Nowadays, we have what's called dirty electricity, which was what Dr. Millen was writing about, and that's a result of all the harmonics and digital modulation that comes from all our computerized equipment. You have to put filters between all the digitalized equipment and the electric grid, so that what travels on electric wires is more or less a pure sine wave. You put the hot wires and the return neutral wire close together. If you underground them, you twist them and put them in a shielded cable. In Denmark, they have a 5-wired system, so none of the return electricity travels through the earth. It all travels through wires and is confined to the wires as much as is possible. That is an engineering problem. The cleaning up wireless is no longer an engineering problem. That simply cannot be made safe. They're building 5G for what is called the Internet of Things. What is being planned is most of our major possessions are going to have, at least this is what is being planned, are going to have antennas in them so they can connect to the Internet and talk to each other, and everything's going to become smart appliances, smart this, smart that. But it's all going to be done wirelessly, and it's all going to be done by communication with miniature cell towers in the street in front of your house. And it's going to require basically cell towers, little antennas on street lights and street poles and stop signs. They're estimating every 3 to 10 houses will have an antenna out in the street. This will escalate both the health and the environmental effects, which are wiping out bees, butterflies, and insects and birds. And it's another level that we must not reach. And we have lobbyists, and mind you, there are not many of us, but there are more than there used to be, lobbying Congress, talking to state legislators, talking to attorneys general. People in our network are working tirelessly to stop the rollout of 5G. That is the terrestrial technology that must be stopped, and the Internet from space is the other technology that I think is one of the most urgent threats to life right now.
And in your book, you identify ailments that have become almost epidemic that seem to correspond with the growth of wireless technology, such as diabetes and cancer.
It began before. Those began when telegraph wires encircled the earth in the 1850s and 60s. Specifically, diabetes, cancer, and heart disease